In retrospect, I probably should have seen this coming. This place usually does things at the worst possible time. Gramps, Marcus asked, looking around frantically. Glimmer, he said, and I had to shush him a little. We don't want to cause a scene. The hospital's on thin ice with all the disappearances. One more person goes missing, and that's my grandpa you're talking about, Marcus said, a dangerous tone entering his voice. Be extremely careful about how you... But when the toilet flushed in the bathroom, we both turned expectantly. Glimmer came out, fixing her garments, and jumped a little when she saw us.
You're back. Thank goodness. Did everything go as... Where is Fisher?
Marcus wrapped his arms around her and pulled her to him, apparently as afraid for Glimmer as he had been for his grandfather. We got back and he's gone. I thought maybe you had been snatched too. Glimmer's eyebrows went up.
I was only in the bathing room for a few minutes. I had to make, and Hunter tells me it is not advisable to use the plants like I would at home.
I looked at Marcus, but he just shook his head at me. Regardless, it looks like they got him. What do we do now? Marcus looked at Glimmer, but she only shrugged. I guess we'll have to go in there after him, Marcus said. We can do that? I asked, not sure why we hadn't just done that from the start. Yeah, but it's dangerous. It'd be a lot easier to just untether it and let it float away. If we go inside the desme of a spirit, we have to play by the spirit's rules, or be prepared for a fight. If we die in there, we die for real, and our spirits are likely to get trapped in there too. If this is a big old angry spirit, especially one that's been eating people, then it probably has a whole lot of power. More than enough to swat you and I with, I would think. I blew out a breath, putting my head in my hands. Crap. How do we do this? I've got to find the entrance, and then we'll be able to create a doorway. Once that's done, I need someone to make sure that no one messes up the doorway while we're in there, or we'll get stuck.
I will be coming with you.
Glimmer said it like there would be no arguments on the matter, but Marcus immediately attempted to shut it down. Glim, we need someone to keep the door open.
And why must that be me? I am a warrior hunter, and I will protect you.
If some nurse comes along and messes this up, then we'll all be stuck inside this ghost's home turf. I don't doubt that you're a mighty warrior, but even you would have trouble here where we're going. That gave me an idea. I might have a way to keep people out of the room so that Glimmer can come with us. Marcus started to argue, but I pulled out my phone as I called up Carl. That was quick. I'm guessing you don't have good news. I brought him up to speed, and he said some words that would definitely have got him in trouble with administration. Don't worry, I told him, when he was still damning everything with an earshot. I've got a plan, but I need your help. If it keeps my ass out of the alligator den, then I'll do just about anything. Probably owe you more favors than you owe me at this point, so tell me what you need. I need the room to be closed off for a few hours. No one in, no one out. Once we're done, I need someone to clean up the mess, too. Okay, I'll grab David and put someone from custodial on notice. How long you need? Let's say 3 hours, I said, doing the math and looking at Marcus, who nodded after a little thought. We can do that. See you in 10. I put my phone away and told my companions that we'd have help in about 10 minutes. Well, I guess what we need then is to find the door, Marcus said. He began running his hands over the walls, eyes closed, while Glimmer sat pensively on the bed. The two were pointedly not speaking to each other, and I supposed I could see where Marcus was coming from. He and Glimmer were clearly very close, and he didn't want her to get hurt. If I had someone I felt that strongly about, I wouldn't want them to get hurt either. But she was clearly used to danger, maybe even magical danger. Marcus would need to check that sort of behavior if he meant to keep her by his side. But honestly, none of that was any of my business. Marcus stopped suddenly, his hand over the left back corner, and he started moving furniture out of the way. Glimmer came to help, but when she couldn't make the bed move, I went to help her with the parking brake. We got the space as empty as we could, and then Marcus took out a pen and began to draw on the wall. He drew a door, complete with knob and hinges, and added some runes and sigils for good measure. Then he stepped away, looking at the door and nodding. Yeah, that's how they're getting in. There's a door between those two corners. But you just drew that, I said, not really understanding. True, but the door on the other side is just as real as the one that leads into this room, and the person opening it is a lot more skilled than I am. See now why you'd be needing a cleanup crew, came a voice from the door. I turned to find Carl and David walking in. The custodians are not going to be happy about that. They might be happier when they stop losing cleaners to the room, though I can't promise they won't still lose them to the other anomalies. Marcus reached out and touched the knob, and I gasped as it grew full in his hand. The edges began to take on dimensions, the door growing from the wall, and the runes and sigils grew with the light as they helped it come into being. Soon the wall had sprouted a very regal-looking door, all dark wood and smooth angles, and Marcus looked back at Carl as he waved Glimmer and I over. Remember, don't let anybody touch this, and under no circumstances should they close the door. If the door becomes unstable, we could get stuck in there. People might come out. If they do, just get them to sit and stay calm. Hopefully, we'll be able to get a few people out before we cut this place off. What he didn't say was that he hoped one of them would be his grandfather. Ready? Marcus asked, and as he opened the door, I saw Glimmer slide one of the large, uncomfortable-looking chairs in front of it. David took a seat, saying that he would keep it open until we got back, and the three of us went inside. I'd expected some kind of sensation, cobwebs or plastic drapes or something, but it was no more uncomfortable than walking into the bathroom from my living room. The other side was, well, honestly a lot more regal than I had thought it would be. The hallway was more like a palace corridor, hanging swags and tabards, windows looking out over immaculate gardens, and suits of armor that lined the halls. The carpets were plush red, incredibly thick and very soft. Little chandeliers hung from the ceiling every few feet, and they were lit by actual candles. I expected to look out the window and see a unicorn or a dragon go by. It was very medieval times, but it was kind of cool, too. I had a pretty good idea of who had made this, and you had to give her credit. The place was certainly dramatic. I guess we're going down the hallway, Marcus said, glancing to the left and seeing a dead end. I shrugged. Doesn't seem like we have much of a choice. The farther down we got, the more I started hearing chamber music, the plinky sound of something old, something played on a harpsichord or those boxy little pianos you see in Game of Thrones sometimes. I could vaguely hear the clink of china as well, and soft talk that wafted across our senses like mouse feet. We came into a large room full of little tables, stacked high with tea things and packed with people who clearly hadn't signed up to be here. They were eating off tall, trestled things full of tea cakes, drinking from cups and pouring from multiple pots that sat on the table. The people were all dressed like courtiers from some French painting, powdered wigs, pancake makeup, and exaggerated dresses and suits with a lot of buttons. They were talking in low voices, but their eyes kept drifting up to the dais in a nervous way that children might look at an abusive parent while they're watching TV or doing something that has caused the kiddo to be forgotten for a moment. On the dais was the subject of their fear. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, her head full of tightly curled brown ringlets. She had a crown, something that looked absurd on someone her size, and she was bedecked in a gown that would have put a queen to shame. She had a leg cocked up on the arm of her throne, her eyes boring into the impotent old man who stood before her. She was glaring at him in the way that people look at dogs who have tracked in something nasty, and when Marcus sucked in a breath, I realized who it must be. He was standing tall, his hip not broken in this place, and he was dressed in wizard's robes and carrying a staff. Grandpa looked like a defiant Merlin in this sulky child's court. "I told you I'm bored. Do some tricks for me, wizard. The queen demands it." "And I told you," Grandpa said, his voice small but conveying a certain amount of that suffer not a fool depth that made you believe he was a force to be reckoned with, "that I do not perform tricks." "You will perform what I tell you to perform," the little queen barked, "or I will send you to drift in the abyss. This is my kingdom, and I rule here." "Even a queen may die," Grandpa said, and when he smacked his staff on the ground, the floor shook. She rose from the throne, floating to her feet as she swung her ornate scepter. "So can wizards," she said, the air crackling around her. The people having tea went completely silent, most of them shaking as they watched the two square off, and I wondered how we could be of help here when Glimmer pulled a long knife out of her belt and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder.
"We have to help him. That girl is much more than she seems."
Marcus nodded, swallowing loudly. "Agreed. John, stay low. Try not to get killed." The two of them ran for the dais, and I was kind of just left to watch. I imagine it was how normal people felt during superhero fights. The girl threw herself at Grandpa, moving like a puppet as she just sort of bonelessly floated towards him, and he threw up a shield to block her as she came in. As strong as she was, you could feel the energy radiating off the old man. He was no slouch, and when he pushed her back with a gust of wind and a flick of his wrist, she moved. Marcus moved up beside him, throwing up a shield so that he could attack, but it was Glimmer who really stole the show. She was quick, blinking in and out as she struck at the girl, but the little queen seemed to get that clunky scepter in the way of her strikes. "Coward!" she shouted at the old man, throwing Glimmer off as she tried to leap on her. "You need all of this to beat a little girl?" "You are no child," Grandpa growled, and I saw a long, crackling arc of energy come snaking from the end of his staff as he snapped it in her direction. She ducked it, sending a wave of something dark and putrid towards him, but Marcus was ready with another of those energy domes. They were trying to back her into a corner, trying to trap her so that she couldn't jump around, but she refused to be caged. At one point, she jumped over Marcus and his grandpa and swiped at the back of the old man's head with that huge scepter. Glimmer got her a second before the shield did, and I heard her grunt in pain as she tried to redirect the brunt of the strike. It was getting vicious up there, the power being thrown around, rippling the tablecloths, and I didn't see any end in sight. The three of them were good, but that kid was a powerhouse, and her power felt meaner than theirs. As I stood there, watching them slam into each other, I took a look at some of the people who were sitting around watching them too, and figured out something that I could do. Starting with a couple of older ladies, their dresses clearly quite hot from the amount they were sweating, I asked them if they might like to go with me. One of the women blinked. "What? You mean to a different part of the castle?" No, I mean like back to the real world." The women looked at each other, nodded once as if they needed to think about it, and then followed me quietly from the room. It was far easier than I had thought it would be, actually. Believe it or not, most of them wanted to leave. In many cases, a table beside the one I had asked would hear what I was doing and ask if they could join us. You had to get pretty close to tell, but there were definitely some of them that were not going to return to normal lives. If you've seen the movie Beetlejuice, it was like the corpses that are turning to dust at the end of the movie. Their souls were shriveled, their power drained nearly to the limit, and they would need escorting further than room 301. They were content to stay in the room until it was all done, however, and they mingled with the living quite well. Most of their nice clothes turned into hospital gowns once they were out the door, and David's eyes got a little big when I kept leading them in. He sat patiently enough, though, as the room started to fill up. I got about 40 out in all, and I started to wonder where the rest might be. Used up to nothing, I suppose, and I half expected to see little piles of dust under some of the chairs. They had fought throughout, clashing again and again, but as the people left, I started to notice our less than gracious host beginning to slow down. Her movements were less precise, her strikes less quick and decisive, and when Glimmer struck, she barely caught it on her scepter before Grandpa pushed her into a wall with a phantom monsoon. She crumpled to the ground, trying to focus enough to shove out with more quick and dirty power, but Glimmer pinned her arm with a foot as the three gathered around her. "It's over, Your Majesty," Grandpa said with a chuckle. I don't think so," she said, but when she glanced out at the gallery, she noticed that no one was left watching. "What? Where are my subjects? What did you do?" The two magi and whatever Glimmer was looked out across the tea room, and all eyes fell to me. "You! What have you done? Explain yourself!" It was clearly meant to hold a great deal of menace, but it just came out sounding whiny and a little afraid. "I just took them out," I said. "They wanted to leave. No one really wants to be here. You took them out of their lives, and now some of them won't get to go back to them." I thought she was laughing for a moment, her gasps easily mistaken for chuckles, till she started crying. "What about me? I don't get to return to my life. How is that fair?" I came up to the dais, wondering if I might be able to get lucky again. I extended a hand, putting it on her heaving shoulder, and we were suddenly transported away from the opulent castle and into a very familiar room. She wasn't in a fancy dress now, just a drab hospital gown. There were tubes running into her, an oxygen mask over her mouth, and her eyes had dark circles under them. She looked like she was on death's door, and I suppose she was. Was this the little girl that the orderly had met? Was this the angry little girl that had started all the trouble? "So, what happens to me?" she asked, glowering up from her hospital bed. "What do I do now?" "You could go with them," I said, "but the party's over. There's not going to be any more high tea, or any more abducting people from their rooms you died in either." "Shut up," she spat. "You died," I reiterated, "and you need to figure that out. You aren't just going to magically stop being dead, no matter how many people you gobble up. You're dead, and it's time to move on." "And what?" she asked, looking out the window sullenly. "Rot in the ground? You've been separated from your body for a long time. You've likely already rotted away in whatever grave they put you in." That seemed to be something that she hadn't thought of yet, and when she looked up from her bed, she seemed to have resigned herself. "I guess my chances of getting into heaven are pretty slim." I shrugged. "Not even sure there is a heaven. I'm not sure about any of it. I know that there's a man who takes you there, and he seems to be the one who decides where to take you. I have no doubt that he'll be there when we come out of this place, so I suppose that he'd be the one to ask." She was quiet for a moment, and when I extended a hand, she leaned back a little. "Will you come with me?" She kept leaning away, treating me like I might be sick with something catching, before she finally extended a shaky hand and took mine. "Okay. Don't see as I have a lot of other choices." We came out of the room and were back in the castle again, my new friends still standing around her. "Let her up," I said, and all of them looked at me like I might be crazy. "Let her up," I repeated. "She's ready to go." "If we let her up," Marcus began, but I cut him off. "She won't." "How the hell do you know that?" he asked, turning to look at me. Grandpa laughed. Sounds like he's in the know, just like us. Let her up, boy. I don't think she'd be too difficult to put down again if we had to. They let her up, he and Glimmer not seeming to like it, and I offered her a hand up. Her dress was gone, and she was the sick little girl in the hospital bed again. She took my hand shakily, getting to her feet as we took our first steps off the dais and turned to exit. The others came behind, arraying the girl and I, just in case. And as we headed for the hallway that would take us out, Grandpa came up beside me. So, you've got the sight, don't you? The what? I asked, not sure what he meant. The sight. It allows you to see and interact with ghosts. I think you've got a little more than that, though, he said as he winked at me. Maybe, I said, looking down at the girl in the hospital Johnny. Maybe my foot, Grandpa said as we came to the door. Maybe a talent like that needs to be nurtured, and maybe you could use a teacher. More mutants for our little school, huh, Gramps? Marcus said with a chuckle as we stepped out of Wonderland and back into the real world. I was unsurprised to find the orderly waiting for us when we came out, smiling and clapping as he shook his head at me. You have proven to be a most interesting find, my friend. Every meeting you impress me a little more, and I am so glad I agreed to answer your questions. The little girl was shy around him, but after I talked to her a bit, she went with him willingly. This interested him all the more, and he took the small group of souls, the little girl by the hand, and they all went to the stairwell and vanished from the world as I knew it. Those who were still among the living, about 8 or 9 of them, left the hospital as they tried to put their lives back together. Those who returned were welcomed back with confusion and joy, and it made the paper a week later. It was considered to be a miracle or some kind of mass abduction, and they seemed to have no memory of what had happened to them, a condition that only happened after they left the Desme. Grandpa needed a hand back into bed, his hip going back to being broken when he came out too. He made a full recovery a few weeks later, and I was coming into work as they left. Marcus and I had spoken many more times over coffee, and he told me a lot about runes and sigils and the weird powers that I'd seen on display in the ghost realm. He told me that he had untethered it, saying that the orderly spell had worked perfectly, and there was no danger of anyone accidentally slipping in there again. As I came in and Marcus and Grandpa left, I said my goodbyes, and he handed me a card. The address is on the back. Why don't you come and visit sometime? I'm sure we can buy a little more beer for our nightly talks. Maybe we can teach you something useful while we're at it. Gramps, you just got out of the hospital, Marcus said. Don't you think you need to be getting your strength back before you start taking on more pupils? Oh, he's not my student, Grandpa told him, looking back with a grin. He's yours. What? Marcus asked. No, wait a second. I never... Yeah, complain all you want, boy. There's nothing better for growing power than a pupil to help you discover it. Besides, he said with a groan, there may come a time that we can use all the help we can get. Another torch in the darkness is always a welcome sight. We said our see you laters then, and I let them get home while I went to work. Wizards, ghosts, magic, elves, it was a lot to take in, but as I sat at my desk and got started on my night, it honestly seemed like the most normal thing about this place. Just another day at Cashmere Medical Center. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.